Alex, thank you so much for being here with us. Tell us, where in the world are you logging in from? And can you tell us a little bit about the organization that you work with called Serge?
Wonderful. Thank you, Pastor Adrian, for inviting me. Thank you, Nataki, and everyone else. It's good to see you all. My name is Alex Jun. It's Jun like the sun, not June like the moon. I'm calling from sunny Southern California. I'm in the Los Angeles area. I've been here for over 30 years and been very actively involved in my local church in the last couple of years. The church is called Citizens in downtown Los Angeles. A predominantly Asian American church, unapologetically Asian American, unapologetically Christian in downtown Los Angeles. It's been an honor to be there as a member of this church. Yeah, and I'm working with Serge. The spelling is Serge, as in it's a embroidery term apparently. When things are falling apart on your clothing and it's frayed, it's a stitch. It's a stitch, a serge. And so part of our philosophy at Serge is grace at the fray. That's our tagline, finding grace at the fray as your life is unraveling. So that's that's purpose of the word surge as opposed to the other type of movement surge, but I like both. Used to be called World Harvest Ministries, and that started by Jack Miller back in 1983. History will share that Jack Miller was a very passionate, God-loving man who struggled with like dealing with other people and anger and other things like that as a missionary and as a pastor and as a theology professor. Got into this material called sonship, which I'm happy to talk more about. But understanding how we are children of God, how we're either performing or pretending, even as missionaries and pastors and all these very important roles as Christian workers, are we getting to the root of who we are as children of God and being satisfied just with the sufficiency of God's grace? I could talk a little bit more about Surge, but that's the history. It's been a missions organization since the 80s, and also a publication arm with sonship material. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. So, Alex, tell me, before we get into your role there at Surge, can you share with me why would an Asian American guy come to an African American missions conference and hang out with an African American missions network? What's up with that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Part of that, I think, is just my own journey as a Christian, and maybe I'll share a little bit of my testimony of how I became a Christian. I did not grow up in a Christian home, and it was in college through campus ministry that the Lord saved me. This was the timing, but it's interesting because it's the people who were evangelizing to me on campus, the people who shared the gospel, were people who looked like me. And it was other Korean Americans in various languages. Sometimes they'd approach me in Korean, other times they'd approach me in English, but they were very keen on sharing the gospel with me. And it was just neat to be able to hear the gospel being shared by people who looked like me, but didn't necessarily think like me when it came to spiritual matters. But there was something beautiful about that was really resonated for me was they were very comfortable in their ethnic identity and also very comfortable in spiritual identity. And so that really landed for me in being able to embrace both my cultural identity as well as eventually my spiritual identity. But that was a big struggle growing up in a mostly white context. A lot of bullying, a lot of fights, and things like that, a lot of racism that I experienced growing up in Northern California in a mostly white school. If you look
Gotcha. And so that journey has landed you at an organization called Surge, and you are the director of intercultural development, is it?
That's right. Yeah, it's a new role for the institution. Surge again has been around since the 80s. It's probably like 90% white, based in Philadelphia. but they also recognize the need to have cross-cultural and intercultural development. The cross-cultural, I think most understand. If you're a missionary from North America and you go to Kenya or you go to Asia, you're serving, you can see the cross-cultural piece. What's harder to see is the intercultural. So if your team is diverse ethnically, or in other cultures, you have single women, for example, that are different from working with mostly married folks, different denominational affiliations. So there's always some difference. And so they recognize the need to really address the intercultural development piece for the company.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
Awesome. So we're talking about from here to everywhere, and what that looks like is what is God doing across the earth. And so I know that Serge is involved with mobilizing Gen Z. We want you to talk a little bit about that and what are the challenges there. I think even as a pastor, we're all looking at the next generation in our churches. How do we hold on to them? How do we get them involved in kingdom movement? What are some of the disconnects between the generations? And Gen Z is one of the most diverse generations we've seen than all the other generations, and that's a plus for us. You guys also do some work around church planting and medical missions,
That's right.
and you also do business as missions. So, one of the things I like to share is that only 2% of the body of Christ will be called to pulpit ministry, what we call full time ministry. But what does the rest of the congregation do? And I think that idea of business as missions or workplace ministry is something we need to dive into. So we can take this conversation in a couple of different ways, but I know those are areas that Serge plays with in their sandbox. So why don't
Yeah.
we start with Gen Z and then move our conversation into the medical and business as missions for our listeners today. So can you talk a
Yeah.
little about what you're doing with Gen Z, and we'll just put the ball in your court.
Yeah, thanks so much. I don't think it's unique to Surge. I think most missions organizations are sort of in this place where a lot of our workers from Gen X and previous, the workforce is getting older. The mentality had always been you're a career missionary. You go when you're 20s and then you serve for 30, 40 years. And I think that model is continuing to change. And you see younger generations saying, I'm not sure I want to commit 30, 40 years to anything. And so already the mindset is different for this generation. How does Surge and other organizations really address that? So rather than making a 20-year commitment at 23 or 24 years old, we're like, how about 2 years? How about 1 year? How about an internship? And let's do maybe 20 years of 1 year contracts as you think about this as the Lord works. And so I think that's something that Surge is moving toward, recognizing that the workforce is changing, recognizing that we need younger folks to want to go. Part of that is going on internships and doing apprenticeships. Surge is toying with the idea of having paid internships in some way, shape, or form. Of course, you still have to raise funds, but to be able to have some salary as Gen Z are concerned about maybe some of their resumes and having gaps on their resumes, things like that. So I love the intentionality that Surge and other organizations are moving toward to say, how do we make missions um, more attractive for people who love the Lord and love the Great Commission, but hadn't just simply said, well, I'm not doing a 30-year career out on the field. Pastor Adrian, I love what you said about the 98% of the workers. My friend Michael Lowe, who works for Lausanne, the CEO for Lausanne, had written about this as well. And he said, we need to get the 99%. If 1% is going into pulpit ministry, everyone else, if we believe in the priesthood of all believers, then we're all called to mission in some way, shape, or form, either in the classroom or in the medical office or in the boardroom. And so this is where Surge has been very helpful in expanding the opportunities for folks who say, I'm not called to be a pastor to plant a church or to minister from the pulpit, but I still love the Lord and I want to serve. What are my options?
Yeah. What would you say are some of the challenges that Gen Z is facing, both in the church and in missions?
Yeah, I would say Gen Z because they are either incredibly diverse ethnically or they are the majority white population, but they care so much more about inclusion and excellence. This is something that we should celebrate. And so they want to see that the organization really does care about things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. In the work that they do, can they recognize? And so that's one of the things that I'm really trying to address is for Gen Z folks to recognize we are an organization and missions has long been associated with colonization and sort of a white normative practices. So if you're a Gen Z, you're like, man, I don't know if I want to be a part of that kind of colonizing movement. Um, and so, can we be upfront to say these are issues that we are also trying to address? Talking about inclusive excellence, talking about hospitality, talking about difference and working together. That's language that Gen Z are looking for to say, oh, are you even aware that these were things that are going on as you were serving? And so I think that's important. Having someone in a intercultural development role, I think speaks volumes for Surge. And I hope every organization, every missions organization would have some role like this so that Gen Z, when they're looking, do you have a statement on diversity? Are you addressing some of these concerns? That's one big area that I think of. The other might be along the lines of gender. Are you equally supportive of women in ministry and in leadership?
Mm.
Or is this yet another area of patriarchy that sometimes Christianity in America gets associated with?
So let's
Um,
pause here for a second. Alex, you're bringing up some really good hot topics, especially for this time. The church exists inside of a country that is taking a different direction with DEI, right? So, how do we as the church continue to speak about this issue of DEI, women in ministry, diversity, um, different ethnicities working together when we live in a government and sometimes in workplaces that are taking a different route or backtracking there, where these are being reimagined? What is your advice to the church on this issue? Is this a political issue? Is this a kingdom issue? And when we go DEI, I think sometimes people think that we're going political. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. My take has always been let the church be the church. Let the
Mm,
church lead the way God has intended the church to lead, which means we as Christians should be the first ones to recognize others, the first ones to embrace difference. The Bible is replete with examples of this. In Acts, when you talk about the difference of the Jews and Gentiles, when you talk about the difference between Hebraic Jews and Grecian Jews in the
mhm,
distribution of food and being overlooked by widows, how did the church respond? How did the church respond? The early church gave up and sold everything they had so that nobody would be without. This is not
mhm,
capital redistribution. This is biblical practice. And so let the church be the church. Politicians will always take advantage of an issue as it benefits them on all sides.
yeah.
And so my hope is that the church doesn't get caught up in getting overly politicized. Although my friend Jamar Tisby reminds me regularly, it's important to address politics. We don't need to be political and we don't need to be partisan, but we do recognize politics, certainly. But let the church be the church. And so when we talk about embracing difference, about giving voice and positions of leadership to women, this is a biblical matter, not a
Mhm.
political matter. And so let's not get confused by that. And I think the church can lead in this way, as we always should have, and in many cases, in some denominations and some faith traditions, always have.
Thank you for that. I appreciate your heart on the matter. As we talk about Serge's work with Gen Z and the challenges and the benefits of that generation, business as mission, that may be a new concept for some of our audience. What exactly is business as missions and what is Serge doing in that space? And what are the opportunities that exist for churches and believers who want to approach the kingdom of God from a business perspective?
Yeah, great question. One of the ideas of business for missions or business for transformation, a real practical challenge is trying to gain access into certain countries that will not allow visas. to be approved in certain countries and for certain types of work, mission work especially, church workers and Christians. And so creative access countries require creative solutions. So that's, I think we need to recognize that part. But on the other side, if God's gifted you with the ability to be entrepreneurial and to be able to do certain tasks, I don't think we're leaning into our calling if we all of a sudden stop being a business person and say, I'm going to try to plant a church. I'm going to end up doing something that's out of my wheelhouse. All for the kingdom of God. Doesn't it make more sense that if God's given you certain gifts, that we lean into those gifts for the kingdom? And that's where I think business of missions is so critical, to be able to lean into what you naturally do well. And I think, again, let the church be the church. God's economy works, rightly or wrongly, through finances. And so if we can find solutions where business as missions can really generate income and be self-sustaining, well, that's a good thing for the kingdom. And,
Hmm.
and that's also a good thing for the work that you do, that not everybody will relate to a pastor in the pulpit. Sorry,
Hmm.
Pastor Adrian, but not everyone's going to relate to a pastor in a pulpit.
I
They
think
might
you're right.
relate.
And so I was talking to a friend here, right, who said that sometimes we try to take pulpit ministry, pastors, missionaries, and turn them into business people. And that can be a challenge. Whereas if we take those who are already wired for business and witness to them and allow them to actually do business as missions from their perspective. And what have we seen in places like Spain? We see business people who are opening up their buildings for churches where the rent and the expenses can be kept low. We are seeing miraculous healings happen in the business space as believers are moving into that place. So I definitely think that you're right that the pastor isn't going to reach everyone. When people are spending most of their day in the workplace, there's a huge opportunity there. So can you talk about a few examples of industries where you see this working? I know in the mission space, coffee shops are very popular, but
That's right.
are there other business ventures that Serge or yourself can share with our audience in terms of here's some models that we see working.
Yeah, coffee shops obviously are a big one. We've got some of our workers establishing coffee shops, and in one particular work, it's coffee shops are employing formerly trafficked young girls and women and finding work opportunities for them. Um,
Wow.
this is in South Asia, also in Southeast Asia, so that's a big ministry. Um, and then also, if you're in a certain country where you have certain natural resources like ceramics, being able to start a ceramics business and making plates and china and things like that as a business. I think that's an important element too. I mean, there's other parts of it we could probably get into. It's business, but it's not really business if you're a physician, right, and your professional calling, working in a hospital, right, this is what you do.
Mhm.
And maybe it's not seen as business as missions, it's categorized differently as medical missions, but it's leaning into your own profession.
Mhm.
There's something beautiful about Christian leaders in this space that are ethical and moral. That's also a living example, especially perhaps in countries where the ethical and moral boundaries are somewhat blurred.
Mhm.
Where you sort of lean into corruption and payoffs and things like that. How do you show that you're a beacon of light as a Christian business person in the ethics of what you do? That may not necessarily translate into greater revenue, but it certainly is a witness to a watching world.
Yeah, a good resource that has helped shape my thinking here, and I want to just share it with those who are listening, is the work of Patrick Lay, right? Who is got a book out called Workship, and it's really talking about our ministry in the workplace and how we can be a lot more effective there than we could ever be on a Sunday morning, just by the proximity that we are to unbelievers,
Sure.
seeing our life work, seeing our lives lived out with character and competency. We as Christians in the workplace don't want to be part of the the gossip and the naysayers in the workplace. We want to have our light shed there as well. So I just wanted to share that as a resource for
Amen.
those who are listening. The book, again, is called Workship, and it's about how to turn your time in the workplace into a worship offering to the Lord. So thank you for speaking into that for us. So Serge does this business as missions work, but you also, on the other side to that, do church planning. Can you talk to us about that, and what challenges and what growth you're seeing in that space? Church planting, having done it myself, they say it's the work of young men. It can be extremely hard and difficult. But can you talk a little bit about church planting and the work that Serge is doing there?
Yeah, the church planning part is probably the most common for most agencies. And the regular challenge, I think, if you're North American, is learning to partner well with indigenous leaders, leading national partners, and finding that right balance of learning to let go. One of another philosophy within Surge, what really drives us is ministry from weakness is one of our uh,
Mhm.
top core values, ministering from weakness. And it's being able to recognize what soft power we bring as North Americans, as church planters, with all of our financial resources and all these other things, um, is the way that North American Christianity, what worked in the US, the right approach in England or in Europe, in Africa, or in Asia. And so being very attentive to that piece, I think, is critical. Um, and again, if you're a majority white North American, you think the way you think naturally. And so it's a regular challenge to recognize your own weaknesses and
Mm,
your own blind spots, to be able to say, I don't know what I don't know. And so seeing your national partners as your teachers, national partners, even if they don't have the titles or the positions, they are our teachers. And it's a
mhm,
tremendous approach toward cultural humility in working with, and the goal being how do we work ourselves out of a job
mm,
so that national partners would take over. That kind of thinking, that kind of conversation amongst church planting leaders is critical, and maintaining that thinking so that we don't become imperialistic and
mhm.
colonizing, well-intentioned though we might be. This is an opportunity for me to go back to your original question about like why would a good-looking Korean American join African Americans who are mission-minded? How could I not? I mean, we're so aligned in terms of a minority perspective in the United States with a great kingdom vision. I just love being with like-minded people in that space. But what comes naturally, I almost feel like for people of color and Black, Indigenous, and people of color, being able to code shift regularly, being able to engage in work where we're with our own people and we're able to be ourselves and talk naturally. And then when we're in other spaces, we're coded in the way we think about how we approach our language and things like that. Sometimes, not always, because we want to be authentic, but being able to recognize these differences. I believe the Lord's given us this great gift. It's never been a liability. It's always been an asset for us.
Mhm,
It's our secret weapon. Uh,
mhm.
and being able to use that for the kingdom,
Yeah.
especially if we talk cross-culturally. What a gift. What a gift we are to be able to be using those gifts, I mean, for God's kingdom. And already having a sense of awareness of reading a room and being able to recognize people are different from the way I naturally think, because that's how most of us as BIPOC folks in the church were raised in the US.
Yeah, I think this is where labels and language become important, even things like calling ourselves minority or a single mom, right? So some of these labels that we have gotten from sociology don't align with our kingdom identities. You're not single, you're not alone. God is with you.
Amen.
He's put you around community and family. I think in the church we've been very guilty of worshiping marriage and treating singleness like it's a curse.
That's right.
They both are acceptable stations that have their own area of gifting in the body. I love what you said. It's always been an asset. It's never been a curse. And so we've got to watch that we don't wear what the world tries to place on us, that we are fearfully and wonderfully made and
Amen.
set for such a time as this. And so it's great that I can sit here with my Asian American brother, right, and have this conversation about kingdom business, and that you would have something to contribute to the churches in our network when we talk about church planting and the challenges there. We've got more in common than we do that is different, and that yet our differences have values as well. And I think in the journey of walking with one another, we come to a place where our diversity is celebrated and not tolerated. And
Amen.
that's from every angle, right? Even when we go to a different church and it may not be the music that you want to hear. And I always say the music, it's not for you. It's for Jesus. Does Jesus enjoy
Amen.
hearing it? And if he does, then I want to be involved in that sound.
That's
So
right.
as we talk
Beautiful.
more about the work of Serge, from church planting to Gen Z, I'm really interested in the work you guys are doing with medical missions. And so, can you talk a little bit about that? And then, how do churches get involved in that work? Do I have to be a doctor to participate in medical missions? Do I have to be a nurse? Do I have to have a medical background to care for God's people medically? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, again, leaning into how God has already designed us and given us certain vocational giftings and skills as a physician, as a nurse practitioner. I mean, there's so many different areas from the medical world that you can continue to use your very gifts um, uh, here and there. And so I don't think that changes, but there's greater intentionality. And so if you are in the medical profession, and want to use your services for kingdom work abroad, there is always an opportunity through Surge. And probably from what I've noticed, I've been with the company for about a year now, but some of the strongest elements of what we do is this medical mission piece, working in hospitals. And working alongside national partners who are also physicians. And that's a beautiful sight. So if that's what you've been doing and you feel like the Lord's moving you in this direction, then please come talk to us. There's something beautiful, I think, about people who are experts. There's one person that I'd heard recently who's one of our workers, who's a physician, just got a $1 million grant for some of the work that he's been doing. It's funny because the company Surge seems very sort of, let's downplay that. Oh, shucks, we don't want to. But my goodness, there's something beautiful about a Christian witness to say you are as competitive in your calling in the work that you do, and it's being recognized even in the secular world for some of the research and advancements that you're doing in your particular subspecialty. I think that's beautiful. And so, again, in a very similar way, going on the mission field isn't less than. I think that's an important point that I want to strive. We want to send our best out into areas. It's not just people who couldn't make it in the United States. I think that's a
Mm,
mistake in the way we think about foreign missions. Let's
yeah.
send the oddest, socially awkward, the most non-accomplished person who couldn't hack it. Maybe they're meant for mission. No, we got to think the other way. Who do we have who's the best? That would be so honored and proud in our own churches to say, this is the epitome of what we want as a Christian in church and outside of church. That's who we send. Um,
Yeah, yeah, and that's good. I think this is a discipleship issue, right? Because
Amen.
if we are discipling well, then we are always replenishing our ranks. Our friends over at 1615 say this: missions actually requires that you do give up your best, right? We see
Amen.
this biblically. The church, when they sent workers out, sent Paul and Barnabas, right? They did not send people who did not know what they were doing, who could not cut it in profession. They sent people who were professionally a witness, who were theologically sound, whose works were followed by miracle signs and wonders, who had an
Preach.
apostolic thrust, right? Where they could go back and revisit and strengthen these churches. We need a mindset that missions is going to require us to send our best soldiers, because if we don't, if we're sending the weakest, if we're sending the most ill equipped, what kind of disciples are they going to make?
That's
Right?
right.
And discipleship is not complete until the disciples that we make are making other disciples. And
Amen.
we want to see that spiritual DNA grow
That's good.
stronger, not weaker, right?
Amen.
And so that also means that in the church, we've got to hit a sacred cow, which is we're very territorial. We don't
Yes.
like to share our people. We don't want our pastor away from his pulpit.
Mhm.
Every time I leave, it is when are you coming back? Why do
Mhm.
you have to go? you know, and in a sense, we get spiritually fat off the word. We get
Yeah.
spiritually fat off of what our spiritual leaders provide for us, not realizing that there are other places where they are needed. And so,
Amen.
how do
Amen.
we help? How do we help the church prepare to send their best?
Yeah, that's right. I think part of it is proximity matters. If we ourselves haven't gone out to different places that we're talking about, it's always just in theory. This is true for every pastor, should be going regularly to different fields outside of the US to see what they're doing and to learn from what they're doing. And so you church members, we want our pastors out on the mission field. We want them out there regularly. See that not as a threat, but see that as a huge benefit for the local church because your senior pastors, all your pastors are thinking much more globally. Their vision and the size of God gets so much more increased because of that. And every member should also experience a little bit going out on short-term trips to see what's going on in places that either you may have a desire to go or you have a desire to give more. Being connected to a certain person and a place, I think naturally we gravitate and we'll give more of our time, of our money, of our prayers. And so I think that's an important part of what we do is just a regular rotation and partnership with folks on the field and different field work that we're doing. Um, that'll keep us from making missions seem so distant,
Mm.
so far away.
Yes, 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 yes. Alex, thank you for letting me hog your speaking time here. This is really a platform for you to share, and I've just been enjoying the conversation. But
Naturally.
whether we're doing medical missions, whether we're mobilizing Gen Z, whether we are planting churches, we are all sons and daughters of God. And so I
Amen.
know that this sonship curriculum and teaching is something that's big with Serge. So why don't you take just the next couple of minutes to kind of walk us through what that looks like? I think one of the things that we don't do enough is have sonship at the center of our identity. Sometimes we wear our ethnicity. Before I'm a black man, I'm a child of God, right? Before the Bible says in God there's neither Jew nor Gentile, male nor female. So even before I'm a man, I'm an offspring of God, and so that's something that we share in common. Can you just share with our audience and walk us through that teaching, that curriculum? Where is what is Serge trying to impart into us through the sonship teaching?
Yeah, thank you for that. Again, sonship is part of the curriculum that has been developed through our renewal department at Surge. And a lot of people don't realize that sonship material is actually connected to a missions organization. People have just been using the material, and we want people to use the material freely. But probably it starts with this idea that the cross does not get any bigger. We just need to recognize how big the cross is compared to how small we are. And the more we recognize that, you see this sort of growth. The cross gets bigger in our eyes. We just finally able to see it because it's never been our work. It's never been by my own abilities and my own strength. And I think that's part of the core philosophy behind sonship. Um, some of the material that we start getting into, especially for Christian workers, are you pretending or are you performing, right? In either case. And we're struggling with that because, how do we see our work before our Savior? Part of the material also, this great question that's asked, if God is looking down on you right now, he's looking at you, how would he describe you? And people struggle with that. And some of the answers, oh, God would be disappointed. God is angry. He's shaking his head, saying, oh, Alex, you could do better. You can do better. No, the only answer is God is so pleased. He's so glorified by his creation. That is the only answer. Do we fully understand that? And if we don't, we're going to pretend that we're better than we are. We're going to perform to try to earn God's love, especially for pastors and missionaries and Christian workers. But for all children of God, we need to recognize that. So the material is fabulous. We address righteousness, self-righteousness issues. We have rules, right? And we have righteousness rules that, well, this isn't the way you're supposed to raise your children. Well, that's parenting righteousness. This isn't the way to run a business. That's business righteousness. I mean, there's various forms of righteousness that we sort of dive into. Gospel-centered life is one of the books that we use as a part of the sonship material as well. Just really eye-opening, liberating for the Christian, especially if you're a servant working professionally as a Christian minister or working as a full-time Christian worker. We get caught up in the performance.
Mm.
So these are beautiful universal truths, biblical truths for us, but at the same time, sometimes the examples that they use are tied to a majority culture. And so Serge, recognizing this, said, can we maybe have sonship apply to, say, Black Americans who might experience something slightly different? And what would be the right examples? What's the right curriculum to approach? So we have Kelly Brown, who was also at the NAAMC conference. My Black sister, and she's a Southern woman right now, but she has been hired to deal with and to work with the sonship material as they revamp it. We're calling it Sonship 2.0, but she and her husband, Howard Brown, who's been very involved, and he was also at the NAAMC conference, they're creating something called kinship. So it's a
Mm.
twist on sonship, but it's sonship for Black folk. And how does it apply in different ways? Culturally contextualized, just like good missionaries ought to be. And so we really want to press that for folks who are interested in sonship, but want to make sure that it's contextualized correctly for their people. Wonderful opportunity. Kinship is what we're calling it, and that's in development.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. We have a question in the chat from our friend Cynthia. She feels like you hit the nail on the head when we talk about sending our best. How do we create more connections and create hubs in terms of missions training, sending our best? How would you recommend creating those connections and hubs for those individuals?
Yeah, wonderful question. Thank you for that. I think it starts on stateside as we talk about mobilization. How do we, and again, that's partly why I think Serge really wants to work with NAMAC on a regular basis to have regional connections as we address these types of conversations more often. We need to have them early and often.
Mm.
To say, how can we, Pastor Adrian, you mentioned this earlier, that we get very territorial in the way we do our work in the local church and on missions. And so these types of spaces are critical. Having different agencies work together, we're not going to be territorial. Surge is not tied to one particular denomination. And so
Mm.
we want to work with different groups and different agencies. Um, that's good kingdom expansion. It's a very spacious, generous way of thinking. And I
Yeah.
think we need more of that together.
Awesome, awesome. We're coming to the end of our time here. This is more of a shameless plug. Tell me about your NAMAC conference experience. You were with us this year. How was it for you? What did you see? Can you share a little bit for those folks who weren't here?
You know, I'm usually around Asian church. If it's not an Asian church, then it's just a white church. So being in Black church experience and the singing and the worship, it was just so very good for me. It's a reminder, God, you are amazing in the way that you have created different people and the way we worship. That was beautiful. The content was absolutely powerful, especially tales from the field, sitting down with different missionaries and their experiences, listening to how Black women as missionaries have experienced the work and how God's using them in a positive way, using their assets, not as assets and not as liabilities. I mean, I walked away with just so much motivation to embrace the Imago Dei, right? Being made in God's image and being and using our Imago Dei for God's kingdom advancement. So on every level, it was just beautiful. And I'm trying to I want to be careful because I don't want to fill a space with Black worship with too many non-Black folk and then all of a sudden, dilute it. But I'm ready to bring some friends. I'm like, hey, we Asian
We
Americans, we
want
can
you to
benefit
bring
from
some
this.
friends. We want you to bring your friends. It's the Lord's sound that He's given to us, and we share it, and also our perspective. So thank you so much. These type of platforms with our partners are not possible without our partnership directors. So I just want to give a shout out to Nataki Johnson, who kind of schedules these for us. And so we're going to be planning more from here to everywhere. So you're going to hear from different partners like Serge, like OM, like SIM on this platform who will come in and share. You see them at conference, but it's really cool for us to take a couple of minutes throughout the month and hang out with one another, encourage one another, to know that God's work is going from here to everywhere. And
Yeah.
so, just as we close out, Alex, if people want to get in contact with you and connect with Serge, how do they do that?
Yes, thank you. Well, you can find me at AJUN at surge.org, or you can check our website, serge.org, surge.org.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, brother, for being with us here today. Thank you for those who have joined. We're going to really look at this again as we put it out on social media and invite more people to be a part of the conversation. Again, he shared his information there. We want you to connect with Serge and the work that they're doing. Remember, you don't have to be a doctor to participate in medical missions. Church planting is happening all over the world, and Serge can help you with that. Challenges and rewards of working with Gen Z is something they'll be able to speak into. And we really want you to get your heart and mind wrapped around business as missions and workplace ministry. It's really important that we mobilize all of the body of Christ, not just the pastors, not just the missionaries, right? All of us play a part in that kingdom work. And so thank you so much for joining NAAMC and Serge today from here to everywhere, and God bless.